Let me start by asking you all a question. How many of you have ever resonated with Ferris Bueller or Pip Pirrip? Okay, let me rephrase the question. How many of you have thought of freedom as something that is achieved through breaking all the rules, or maybe through following them? Both result in freedom, but what type? Today, I'm going to explore individual freedom through comparing the beloved protagonists of John Hughes's Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Charles Dickens's Great Expectations. Now, I understand the arguably odd nature of this pairing. Surely, how can you compare two protagonists created 125 years apart? Two protagonists who battle entirely different environments, with Pip Pirrip navigating making it in Victorian London, and the rebellious 80s Chicago high schooler Ferris Bueller. But their difference is exactly what proves this idea that individual freedom centers all of our stories. Ferris lives a great life, one surrounded by supportive parents, with days spent in his large house within the alive and liberal city of Chicago, with a loyal best friend and the ultimate title of school royalty. But Ferris isn't happy with his freedoms. He desperately fights all authority from his parents, his school, even his friends. So Ferris finds freedom through skipping school, hacking into his principal's computer, stealing his best friend's dad's car, and singing a Beatles hit in the middle of Dali Plaza. Now, all of these actions seem reckless and dramatic, actions that many of us wouldn't relate to anyone outside the world of film. She threw herself at the king's horse, in front of the king and queen. So, what movie was this part of? Well, this wasn't part of a movie. This is part of Emily Davidson's story, part of the story for the fight for women's freedom. And what about the writing of one's own story, even within the tight grip of the iron fist of a totalitarian regime? And no, I am not describing the blurb of 1984, but Anne Frank's brave, reckless decision to document the trauma and terror of Nazi occupation during the Second World War. But what about freedom that isn't so reckless? Pip Pirrip's fight for freedom takes an entirely different approach, through developing good clothes, nice manners, speaking formally, and desperately climbing the social ladder to become a gentleman, enabling the achievement of the title, freeing him from his past and his previous role of commoner. Surrounded by old age, sickness, and death, the only escape for a better future, as for most, is through education. A story that seems to only emerge from novels like Great Expectations. This is the story of Stephen King. Like Pip Pirrip, Stephen King followed the rules, climbing the social ladder of his system. He made it through compliance, hard work, leaving his old life behind, creating his own future, playing it by the rules. So did conforming to society, consequently climbing the social ladder of your system, free you from your past, a certain status, or people that wants to find you? Or like Ferris, have you always freed yourself from the confines of society or family through breaking the rules? I'd like us to consider our own stories and to think about whether we should be more of a Ferris or a Pip in our own fight for individual freedom. A pretty loaded question, I know, so why don't we look at which approach allows individual freedom to be truly successfully achieved, and to compare it to its definition of it being the ability to determine one's own actions and decisions without being subject to external forces or influences. You've worked hard, climbed your way to the top, been clever, and found yourself, when asked at dinner parties, being able to deliver a few lines on the prestigious university that you went to, the degree or master's that you achieved, the embarrassing first few jobs that you worked, and your now very successful career. This is a nice activity, a very rewarding activity, an activity that can assure after-party commentary that you're very successful or that you've done well for yourself. But have you actually gained individual freedom through this approach of conformity? Like Pip, you failed to determine your own actions and decisions and failed to find individual freedom. So let's look again at Ferris. Well, his fight for individual freedom and his approach is simple: break the rules. He must steal a Ferrari, interact with his headmaster, even when supposedly off sick, and carry out the ultimate form of public exposure, singing a Beatles hit on the Von Steuben Day float in the middle of Dali Plaza whilst his dad works next door. Phew! So now we know who to look for in our own fight for individual freedom. All we have to do is steal a car and someone's identity while singing a Beatles hit in the middle of our city square and have our dad working next door. Well, not exactly. While yes, on the surface, Ferris's fight for freedom did rely on these grand performances, I'm more interested in the driving forces behind these acts. The fight for him and his best friend's freedom, the reality of risk of exposure to his failure. Now, these all sound like things that societal shaping people and events have had to consider. The search for joy, the reality of risk and exposure, and the very real possibility of failure. So now we know what the ingredients and methods list for our own fight for individual freedom is. But it seems intangible, something that remains in the world of literature, film, or even history books. Yet in a world in which many struggle against tyrannical leaders and the ability to freely think in what I now call a Ferris mindset, this is exactly the time to be a Ferris. Ferris fights not just for himself, but for his best friend Cameron. John Hughes later explained that Cameron feared that the more people looked at him, the less they saw, something seen in the beautiful scene between himself and the girl in the painting. Ferris recognises that in order for Cameron to find individual freedom without his direct force, he must be exposed to the world, take risks, seek joy, and acknowledge defeat. A defeat that is beautifully accepted as he kicks his dad's Ferrari, a kick that symbolises his final stage in reaching individual freedom. So in a world in which the Pips are used as examples by schools as what true resilience and determination fosters, I do not discredit the Pips, but I recognise that there is a major need for Ferrises, especially right now. So maybe next time, think not with the rules, but against them. And no, I'm not saying be a criminal, but someone who doesn't simply accept and conform, but questions and explores, exploring the world systems for those that can't. After all, Ferris ultimately achieved individual freedom, whilst Pip failed to. And although Ferris's future may have seemed bleak within the society that he battled, a society that had no room for someone like Ferris, we have to remind ourselves that our society has had many Ferrises, and they have forced room. So if there's one thing I'd like you to do after this talk, is to think a bit more like Ferris and a bit less like Pip. I myself, as a Pip, will do the same. Thank you.